Entrepreneurism, or just generally thinking outside of the box, comes naturally to some people. For most, though, it's a learned skill. And I don't care if my kids own their own business someday, but I do want them to have the kind of mindset that comes along with being an entrepreneur. Today's guest has this in his DNA. His great-grandfather got into welding and manufacturing, which eventually led to the family business he grew up in. All the lessons that were taught to him over the years, he's now passing on to his kids. Our families are connected through the small town in Oregon where we grew up, and his family's business employed me and 3 of my brothers growing up. They are an awesome family, lifelong friends. You're going to love today's show. Welcome to the Socks and Soul Podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Ditto. Let's go. My guest today grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. They had a truck bed manufacturing and heavy equipment company in a small town in Central Oregon. Today, he owns several businesses, an all-state insurance agency in West Linn and in Oregon City, Oregon. And his new endeavor is a wellness spa called Ziva Wellness. Welcome to the studio, Sam Workman.
Thank you.
Glad to have you, Sam. Thanks for dropping by.
From 600 miles away or whatever, right?
Yeah, like you said earlier, it's the new normal.
Yes. Yep.
We got to try and figure out how to connect with people without actually inhaling their droplets, apparently.
Speak softly. Stop speaking so moistly.
I like that. Yeah, you got to dry up your words a little bit, man.
That's right. That's right.
So Sam, so just a little backstory. Sam and I know each other because we grew up in the same small town in Central Oregon, Prineville, Oregon, which if you've ever heard of Prineville, you know that it is the home of Les Schwab tires. It's big cattle country, and we both graduated from Crook County High School.
That's right. Go Cowboys.
That's right. Cowboy pride. Sam was 3 grades ahead of me. When you were a senior, Sam, I was a freshman. Yep. And our families were pretty close.
They are. I think our dads are just a couple days apart as far as age goes. And your dad was able to get my dad to start learning more about vacation time, and that was a big blessing to my family. So it's good.
I'd never heard that before. That's funny. Your family is. When you're running a small business, a multi-generation operation, and you got lots of family members tied to it, you really are pretty heavily focused on taking care of your family and the people around you.
Yep. I don't know that my dad ever took a week-long vacation to go out with the Boy Scouts or anything until your dad came along, and they started doing the hikes together and all that sort of stuff, and it was good.
We took a rafting trip. When I was probably 14 or 15, and your dad came along. We went to the St. Joe up in the panhandle of Idaho, and it was probably one of the best. It's still today one of the best memories as far as outdoor adventure trips that I've ever been on. It was spectacular.
Yeah.
Very cool. So I want to start, Sam. Your family is multi-generation in the entrepreneurial, business ownership deal. The company that you guys were running when we lived in Prineville was Workman Sons. And in my family, we love seeing your truck beds drive around. They say the Workman on the side or on the mud flaps. And in my family, we'll take pictures of it on our cell phones and send it to each other and be like, I saw a Workman bed today. And
I have people send them to me all the time. Like, hey, look at this one. Like people in Missouri and stuff will send them to me. So
it's super cool. And so I don't know if you know this, but my very first job, your dad, Kurt, hired me and Logan, my older brother, to pull weeds in the steel field in the dead of summer. And I tell people all the time, it was the worst job ever, and I could not have been happier to have that job because your dad was paying me $4.25 an hour, which was $4.25 more than my dad would pay me to do anything.
So that was my first job as well. And I got paid 25 cents an hour for it.
Oh man, I shouldn't have told you that. You're going to file for lost wages.
Well, we were probably not even worth the 25 cents. So,
I guarantee
but
you I was not worth 425, but boy, it was a great experience, and your dad and your grandpa and your uncle and you and your brother, um, we're all just really good examples to us. So tell us a little bit of the history of that company and where it came from, and kind of how it shaped family culture for you.
okay. Well, my great grandfather, it started with my great grandfather, who was Thomas Levitt Workman. And he started as a blacksmith in Canada. I don't know when. I mean, I'll have to look up the exact date. I'll send you a photo on it, but um, like probably in the late 1800s is when the photo was taken. But and then they started TL Workman and Sons in 1942. They had to get ticket, a ration ticket, to be able to buy the first welder that they had, and because of World War II was going on, so you couldn't just go buy a welder if you were wanting to build hot rods or hobby shop stuff. You had to prove that you were doing something to help the war effort. And
So what? So you would apply for this like permit essentially to be able to buy the industrial equipment.
yeah. So and I don't know how that whole process went, but as far as getting it, but my dad still has that original welder. It's like a family heirloom at this point, and I think it's called. I think the brand of it is Glenn Roberts, and it's like right on there. But
Does it still
um,
work?
oh yeah, still works. I mean, you can plug it's cool enough that you can plug it into a dryer vent at your house. I mean, it's that basic that you can just plug it in and it'll weld. Make your electricity bill go up, um, but they had to get a ration ticket to be able to get the first welder that they had. They were that was in 42, but they were doing like farm machinery repairs and building hydraulic equipment to be able to grow food, which helps the war machine at the time. But and it was my grandfather, his dad, and one of my grandfather's brothers involved in it, and that was in Woodburn, Oregon. They grew it from there. Oh, and my grandfather, he would work the full shift at the Tom Levitt Workman and Sons, and then he would go up to the Portland shipyards and help build ships for the war, basically as a night shift while that was going on. And
he would do that because the family's business wasn't making money yet, or
no, I think it was probably making money, but he could make more money by working two jobs. I mean, it was he's a Depression era kid, that, when he was growing up, and they could use the money, and there was a lot of work to be done, and he was a welder, so he could go and build ships and make money, so and we've got I've heard some crazy stories about some of the stuff that he was building up in the shipyards, just working on big thick chunks of steel, and he was a good worker, so it was good for him, and he was exempt from the war. Remember his arm?
How he
had that broken arm.
That's right.
So so he couldn't go into the war because of that. But my great grandfather, Tom, he passed away at a fairly young age, and then it became, my grandpa ran the business, and then in 71, my grandpa had a bad heart, and they gave him about, I think, 6 months to live in 1971, of all things.
No kidding.
And so they shut down the business in Woodburn. They sold all of the buildings, the assets, and everything. And that's when he moved to Central Oregon, because he wanted to live out the rest of his days cattle ranching. So he bought a big chunk of acreage up there in Powell Butte, and most of his kids, well, a bunch of his kids went with him. He had young kids in the house, and um, they all moved to Powell Butte. And after a couple years of not dying, and I don't know, I don't know exactly why they sold the cattle ranch, but he didn't die. So they sold it off, and he did well on selling it. My dad went back from Central Oregon, moved back to the Willamette Valley, and just got a job at another manufacturing place. And still, after a few more years, in 77, he still hadn't died. So he told my grandma.
I love this. He
Yeah,
still hadn't died, so he's like,
he hadn't
well,
died
I
yet.
guess I should do something productive.
Yeah, he wanted to do something productive. So in 77, he told my grandma, hey, we're going to start just a small shop, a couple of guys. And he called my dad and said, hey, do you want to come back and we'll start a little shop? And my grandma could see, oh, this is going to be a nightmare, it turned out to be what it was, but not a nightmare. But
Sam, was the experience of the business prior to that, was it a good experience? Was it?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a good experience, but, and I don't say a nightmare, but she could see that we don't do anything small,
right?
So him promise her, and they're like, no, it's just going to be a little operation, no big deal. But he called my dad back, and my dad was just working like swing shift or whatever, and said, hey, why don't we open this again? So in 77, they opened back up there in Prineville, and it was a little machine shop. It kind of a funny story. There were already 2 welding shops in Prineville, and the city planners or the permit people basically said, no, Ben, we don't need a 3rd welding shop. There's not enough business. And it was a big logging town at the time, so they were going to be doing repair work and stuff. And but they said, sorry, we're not going to let you build a welding shop. No permits, no building permits for that main building that they had. So my grandpa, the stubborn guy he is, said, okay, it's still on farmland. We'll take a barn permit. How much does a barn permit cost? And so they built that first, I think it's probably 50 foot by 150 foot building. And they, it's all steel structure with overhead cranes, and wired it in for 480 electricity as a barn. Just a cow barn. And they
the most robust cow barn in the history of the United States.
Yeah, it was a great cow barn. And the permit guys, when they would come out and do the inspection, they're like, all right, Ben, this is, and they knew him he'd been there for long enough that they knew who he was, but they're like, all right, this is quite the barn. He's like, yep, it's a barn. They finished building it. He says he walked a cow through it, got some manure on the ground, and then they started moving in the welding machinery.
This is, I mean, when you talk about entrepreneurs and you talk about people who are like, this is what I want to do, and I'm just going to go figure out a way to do it. I mean, this is how they do it. I mean, you think about how many people were like, I'd really like to start this business or that business. And the first hurdle they run into, it's like, well, I can't get a permit, so I can't do it. You know? And guys, guys like you and your dad and your grandpa and your family, it's just like, okay, how do I get over this annoying hurdle? I'm just going to figure it out. It's amazing.
Yeah. So they started in 71 with just a couple of guys doing repair work for the sawmills and the logging industry. My grandfather, when they were in the Woodburn days, he was building the dump mechanism for the farm beds. He had a couple of patents on that sort of thing. They started building them again in Prineville, a different design.
So they were building truck beds in the Willamette Valley prior to this.
Yes. Yep. And the hydraulic equipment and that sort of thing.
Gotcha.
And they grew it and grew it. Probably about the time you were working there pulling weeds was that in the early 90s?
Yeah, I was 14, so that must have been 1995. The summer of 95 would have been when I worked there.
Okay. That's probably about the time that they were running a swing shift. And I think they had, in that mid 90s, they had about 106 employees.
Wow.
Which was about 100 more than what he originally promised my grandma.
All of your grandma's intuition was like, I told you guys couldn't
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah. But I mean, she was just a wonderful lady, and she just kind of like, yeah, it is what it is. And she, they would invite her out to come take pictures of some big project they built, some big dump truck with a trailer behind it, or just something real impressive that we were impressed with. And she would come out, look at it, take a couple photos, and say, "All right, you gonna be home for dinner on time?" I mean, that was just what they were doing.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
and along the way,
So Sam, was that the peak, over 100 employees? Was that kind of the peak operation time?
Yeah. And I think my dad has said that was just too many. I mean, it was too many people for him to keep track of. I mean, it came with its own batch of problems, you know, and he had managers helping him with it. He had some professional, business managers involved by that point, but it was too much, you know, it was too many people. It wasn't an efficient machine at that point, but
I mean, that must have made Workman and Sons one of the larger employers in Prineville, aside from the mills and the school and the government. I mean, you guys must have been one of the biggest employers in town. I had no idea.
Yep. And I think they had to, they worked with the banks at the time. Like one of the banks asked them to change their payroll date or like day of the week, because it was a bigger deal for them. Like my grandpa had this thing about, he wanted to pay people on Monday rather than Friday, so they didn't go blow all their paycheck at the bar.
He wanted them to show up to work on Monday.
Yes. He wanted them to show up to work on Monday rather than being hungover or whatever. And but it didn't work for the banks. Like they had to overstaff on Monday for everybody coming to pay. I mean, 106 employees isn't really that many, but for a small town, it was kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Prineville is not that big. And that makes it a significant employer. Okay. Very cool. And so what was your role growing up in the business?
I pulled weeds for a while, for a couple, you know, for a number of years. I had a high school job at a camera store. I mean, just because it was heavy industry, there wasn't a lot of things for a kid to do. I mean, you know, I got hurt really bad there.
Oh yeah, you got run over by a forklift.
Yeah, that was
That's
like
right.
the year. Maybe did you guys come? Yeah, you guys came the year after I got hurt, I think.
Yes, boy, I totally forgot about that. That was a huge deal.
Yeah, still a big deal in my life, but just because it's heavy industry, I shouldn't have been doing what I was doing, you know, there. But you know, when I mean, he couldn't employ anybody other than his own kid to be doing what I was doing,
right?
You know, so I took a job just with a camera store when I was in high school, mostly because there wasn't a lot that I could do there, you know, and get away with it. But we were always there on weekends, Saturday. I mean, I have a lot of scars from weekend projects and lots of stitches and stuff. But as far as actively working there, it was a little bit sticky because of like my injuries and stuff. I mean, I was always there for the summer times, but it was just limited, as you might expect. But
yeah, for sure.
You know, but when you're a workman kid, you learn how to weld when you're like 7 or 8. And that was what you did on Saturdays, because my dad was there just working on his projects or repair stuff, even though there wasn't a crew there on Saturday. So the fun thing to do is go weld with dad. And, you know, we made tons of scrap metal just out of other scrap metal, you know, building big hunks of junk. But
one of our favorite welding stories. I mean, it was sort of, I guess not really a welding per se story, but it was a huge deal in our family because we were scheduled to go to Disneyland. I don't know if you know this story or if you remember this, but so you know, I'm one of 7 kids, as you know, and we have this Suburban that seats 9 people, And the next day we were scheduled to go drive down to Southern California. And we'd never done anything like this. We'd never been to Disneyland. Like our trips were, we're camping and stuff like that. That's what we did growing up. So this was a huge deal for our family. Well, that day, my brothers were changing the springs on the Suburban to get them ready to go. And Logan and Birch and Brent spent hours, and they could not get one of the bolts off or a couple of the bolts off. I mean, for hours and hours and hours. And it was like midnight, and we're supposed to leave first thing in the morning. And finally, my dad was like, I don't know what else to do. Let's call Kurt. And your dad showed up with some kind of, cutter or welder or whatever, and helped cut those bolts off. And, and in true Workman fashion, he just showed up with a smile and with his equipment, and, and was just acted like it was no problem to him to show up and help us. And anyway, your dad and your family, they just, you have the perfect last name, because that's what we remember of you guys. You just were workers. You were always busy working on stuff.
If you got the right tools, though, you're the guy to call. And I still get that in West Lynn, like Sam's got tools. Let's call Sam.
Yep. I believe it. It's a blessing and a curse, man.
Yep. So I didn't get really involved, other than just the weekends and stuff. I didn't get really involved until I came back from Australia, from my mission. They put me in I did a while of just kind of odds and ends, working in a couple different departments, helping build dump truck parts, and then eventually, there was a space for me in sales along with my brother. He was in the sales department, and he had some special project stuff that he was working on for the plant, and just picked up from there. And Sonny and I formed a partnership with my dad. We kind of set up a side business that was the sales side of the business, and Sonny and I just kind of expanded from there into the other projects that we've done along the way. And then, the economy ebbs and flows. The 2001 thing was pretty hard on my dad's business. It's building dump truck boxes and things that make roads and houses. He's so tied to the housing industry, or was, that when they stopped building houses, they stopped needing new dump trucks or new lumber hauling trucks and that sort of thing. So it kind of slowed down there for a while. And then in 2013, he merged it in with at his current location back over here in the Willamette Valley. And that's where they currently are now. I'll back up a little bit. My grandfather didn't pass away until 2007. He said for a long time, the doctor that gave me 6 months died 20 years ago, or whatever. Or he outlived the doctor by 20 years, something to that effect,
I can totally imagine him saying that. That is spectacular.
Took some pride in it. And, he, were you still there? No, you weren't there by that point when he passed away, but he was a worker. I mean, I think some of it was the Depression era thing in him, but he was sick for a long time, both his heart and his, and his arm that he had the problem with. But when he wouldn't feel good, like whether his heart was trying to fail on him or whatever, he'd put his overalls on and go back to work, and he would maybe not feel better, but it would get his mind off of it. And he'd just keep going to work. And my dad would always ask him, like, how are you feeling today? Because you could tell just in the soreness on his face that he hurt. And he would always tell my dad, I'm okay, just every single time. And enough so that my dad had them go back after the fact and put that on his headstone. Like, I'm okay.
I'm okay.
I'm okay.
When I think of your grandpa, like I can so vividly see him in my mind, and he's wearing these ratty coveralls, and they're
overalls,
and they're greasy,
overalls.
and they're dirty, and he's got his hat on, and you know, and I mean, it's just funny. And the workman jeans are short and stocky. And I mean, I can just see him. I can still visualize him walking around the plant. And, anyway, he was a great man.
Yeah, and they had put him on hospice years before, and they're like, just slow down, and they would drug him up, and he told my dad a couple of times, like, the drugs make me feel sick. And my dad would say, well, do you like, is it worse without the drugs? Would you rather hurt or would you rather feel sick? And he'd say, I'd rather hurt. So he took himself off of hospice, put his overalls back on, and went to work for a couple more years. And I think he took off his overalls the last time about 2 or 3 weeks before he passed away. And when he was not quite all the way awake, he was giving his wife kind of instructions like, hey, tell Kurt those gears need to be done. And she'd say, okay, Ben, okay, we'll tell. And it was all, it didn't make a lot of sense, whatever he was saying. And I went and visited him when he was almost gone. And, I had worked with him at that point for all of my life, but I was helping him with projects and repair work and stuff. But he had his bib overalls, and he kept all of his tools in that front pocket, his calipers and pencils and stuff. And you could see him almost in a coma reaching for his calipers because he was going to measure something with his whatever he's talking about. It was in his blood to work. So
I'd love for you to talk a second about this legacy of entrepreneurism and thinking outside the box. And did you realize growing up that you were learning these really valuable lessons in entrepreneurism and hard work, or was that a realization that came later? I mean, I guess what I mean is when I was around your family, especially you and your dad and Sonny, you guys were always talking about business ideas. You were talking about, water trucks with the Forest Service, or, your sales, or, we're now going to make this new gizmo, or, and those weren't the conversations that we were having in my family. We didn't talk about starting new businesses, and we didn't talk about, how to create the next thing, but it is so ingrained in your growing up. I mean, you're essentially fourth generation entrepreneur, as we look at that.
I don't know that I was new. I don't know that I recognized that we were growing up. I don't think I recognized that that's what we were learning. We were just a self-employed family, and a lot of it was rural Oregon. You try and figure out a new thing. And I think some of it, comes from, my dad's business was building stuff, building anything, whatever it was. Somebody could bring him something and say, can you fix this? It was always, yes, we can fix it. And they would figure out a way to fix it. Or can you build XYZ? Yeah, we can build that. And they would go and kind of figure out how they were going to build it. And I have some fun memories just of being a kid. And even when I did come back after being in Australia, going on long drives with my dad to Portland or Spokane or whatever, to go and look at somebody's project that they wanted something new to help their thing work better, whether it was a fancy trailer or just whatever it was. And we'd drive up and look at their machinery, and they'd say, here's what we want it to do. And my dad would figure out how to do that. And I think the putting businesses together just goes along with that. Like, the water trucks that we put together for the Forest Service, that was just a byproduct of we build machinery, and we build water trucks for other people. We build dump trucks and the water trucks were a side note from the dump trucks and the flatbeds. You know, it
Right.
was like, okay,
Yeah.
now we're going to build some water trucks. It wasn't a main product line, but my brother and dad and I saw like, hey, we can go make some money if we put one of these together, cut ourselves a sweet deal on the water tank along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, so, and you're all of a sudden you're in business just by like, hey, we can do this. And a lot of the things just were, we can see that there's money to be made. Let's figure out how to put it together.
It's interesting because you grew up thinking that way, and I have, you know, I'm trying to teach myself to think that way, and especially when it comes to talking about risk. You know, with your family, it was like, okay, the economy is now changing, so we're going to have to figure out another way to provide and do things, and so your family, you know, kind of started going in different directions a little bit, but just more businesses, more entrepreneurial stuff.
Yeah.
And here you are today, not making truck beds, doing something completely different. And, you know, I mean, if you told me that Sam Workman was going to have a day spa at some point, I'd have been like, I don't think so. That guy welds and plays with grease.
If somebody would have told me 12 years ago that I would be in insurance living in the Portland metro area, I would have said you were crazy.
You're like, no, I'm from Prineville, man. I don't.
That's right.
I have no business being in West Lynn.
Yeah, I don't do insurance, and I don't do big cities. But yeah.
How does this affect your culture now with your family, your wife and your kids? You know, this heritage of entrepreneurism. What is, you know, what kind of conversations do you have with your kids? How are you passing on this, you know, this information?
My wife is not a big risk taker, and she has worried about our businesses for forever. You know, we've been married 21 years, and it probably went for a decade or more that she would ask me, "Are you getting a paycheck this week?" And and I mean, and it became a joke because she was serious. Like, but I got a regular paycheck every single week, but she would ask for years and years, like, "Are you getting a paycheck?" We never missed one, so I wasn't sure why it was a concern for her. You know, she and I come from different backgrounds, and the risk. I feel the risk, you know, and I've asked my dad multiple times, like, how did you deal with it? How did you cope, or how did you put up with because there's stress. I mean, there's stress about figuring out how to grow the business when things change, you know, even in the insurance office, like trying to figure out how to expand, how to grow, employee issues, that sort of thing. But you know, and I still go to him and ask him, like, how do you manage the stress? And he's like, yeah, it's there. Just, I mean, he doesn't have a good answer, because it's just part of what we do. Is you just, there's a risk in starting any business or growing any business. And, you know, there's sleepless nights sometimes, or early mornings where you can't sleep because, and maybe it's not just the risk that is out there, but it's the nonstop projects that you have to move along down the road. Or in the insurance office, I worry about other people's insurance in the middle of the night. It's the stupidest thing, but you know, I'll think about a certain client, like, oh my gosh, they never responded to that, and they have this risk out there that we haven't been able to protect yet. I don't think that my employees have that same concern, you know, out there as far as the business goes. But as far as managing at home, our conversations are different at home today. And I think that today than they were when I was a kid. I mean, my kids know that we're self-employed. They pay attention to what we're doing at the insurance office. They know that when we went from one location to two locations, that was a big deal for us, because we had wanted to get a second location and to expand our business for years, wanted to get that approval from the corporate office to buy another agency. So they saw that the planning and the goal making paid off. And then a short time after that, I went to 3 offices, and the kids were like, wow, 3 offices, this is a bigger deal. And then we sold the 3rd office after about a year. I mean, it was an intentional plan, but my kids were concerned that we had sold a business. Like, what's wrong? Why we don't sell businesses? We just make more businesses. And
Like what
they said, no,
happened, Dad? What's wrong?
yeah,
Should we be
yeah, what's
worried?
wrong? Yeah, why are you selling this business? And there was some concern for a short time. We're like, no, this was part of the, this is part of the plan. It was a good thing, it was the right thing to do. And when we went back to 2 offices, and it was good. But we try hard to teach our kids the same lessons that I learned. It's a little bit different because we don't have a factory to take them to on a weekly basis. My son, well, all 3 of my kids, we bought them gumball machines at a real young age. And we set them up around town, and, we got permission from some of the business owners to put them up. And that's fun. With the pandemic, they're not earning any bank off of them. There's nobody walking into the stores, but it's fun to take my son out, and, we collect the quarters out of them, and I make him run it like a business. We take all the quarters out, we go buy new candy to load it with, and I take out the money from the candy. He's got to donate a certain percentage to charity. And I actually make him double that, just because I'm that kind of guy. Like, if it's supposed to be 10%, you give another 10% to, we donate to the Perpetual Education Fund. And I always make him do an extra 10% there. And
awesome.
But he gets what I'm trying to do. I think that we're trying to show him to go, and it's not a hustle really, but he sees that we've got product that we have to replace, get to keep a little bit of it for yourself as a profit. I do things with him like, I can't remember where they earned some extra cash here just recently. I try to get him to not let it burn a hole in their pocket. And I told him, okay, he had about $50 or whatever. I said, if you can hold it till a certain date in your savings account, I'll double your money. and it was a struggle for him to decide whether he was going to go buy a new Lego, whatever it was, or double his money. And he decided to put it in the savings account and just get it off of his mind. And the date came on Halloween, and on that day he was there like, hey, Dad, you owe me $50. You
Pay
said
up,
you would,
money bags.
Yeah. He's like, and I'm like, okay, come to me on Monday. I don't have it today. And, but those sorts of lessons we learned from my dad. Sonny learned them the hard way. I learned by watching Sonny a lot of things, but
we always glean a lot of really important information and what not to do by watching our older siblings and their mistakes.
Yes. So a story about it with my dad and Sonny. We saved money for our mission fund. Sonny had saved a bunch of money in his savings account and wanted to buy a Honda 3-wheeler. And I don't remember what age he was, but he went to my dad and he said, I've got money in my savings account. Can I borrow it from myself and then pay it back? And, Sonny was working for my dad at the time and getting the paycheck from my dad. And my dad kind of like, well, that's set aside for your mission fund. But if you want to borrow it, you can borrow it, and you have to pay yourself interest, 3% interest, I think it was. So he's like, 3%? Yeah, that's great. I'll do it.
That'll be easy. No problem.
Yeah, no problem. Sonny went and bought the ATV, the 3-wheeler. And when it came time for the first payment, he made the payment, and my dad said, no, that's 3% a week. And he's like, no, that's not what we agreed to. He's like, you didn't agree. I said 3%. We didn't agree on the terms, but and my dad made him pay back. It was paying himself back into his mission fund, but
right.
My dad would get the money, I think, from the payroll before it would hit his check, and they paid it back with the 3% per week. And so I learned lessons about my loan shark of a dad first, but I mean, it was for good cause and it was paying yourself back, but you always have to know the details before you sign on it. And
I mean, there's there's so many great lessons in an experience like that for a kid.
yeah,
That the danger and the power of compounding interest,
yep,
of going into debt and borrowing. And like you said, what are the terms of the contract? What are the terms? You better know before you sign that thing, buddy.
right.
And that's it's such a great story. It's such a great example of of how to teach kids how money works and how it can work for you or it can work against you.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason that it was such a loan shark of a deal was because it was a toy,
Yeah,
you know,
of course.
and we didn't grow up with a lot of that sort of stuff. My grandpa had not a lot of time for toys.
Yeah.
Just it just wasn't in his wheelhouse at all to think about or talk about toys or play. You got spare time? Let's go do some work.
Yeah.
And that was just the way he was.
Will you fill in the gap for us? So, you're home from your mission. You're working, with your dad and your brother. But so, what did you do between there and getting into the insurance business? Did you just work for the family for those 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I worked with my dad and my brother at the factory, either doing sales or helping with some of the repair projects, that they were billing out for. But Sonny and I were mostly in sales, and along the way, we would start kind of the side businesses. We talked about the water trucks. We had a couple of long haul trucks that were doing like Portland to Seattle runs. Sonny and I started a registered Angus business, but we went back. My grandpa had farm land for all the time I was growing up, but they built houses on it. And then I think it was 2004, Sonny and I bought our first Black Angus cows. And it was a partnership that we had with Hank Moss. He helped us with the cows, and we grew it. We were doing artificial insemination with them, and they were nice cows, nice. And we bought farmland to go with it, so we just kind of expanded. We had a drain cleaning company for a while, just kind of a side business. Trying to think of what else we had, but
So with all these side hustles, I mean, was the plan to always keep them just kind of small and like spinning on the sideline, or were you like, I'm gonna try this and see how it goes and maybe expand this into something bigger?
Well, the cows started as, I think, 5 or 6 mother cows, and at one point we had 80. I mean, we weren't trying on the cows. It was just kind of we like to eat beef, so we went back. I mean,
You're like, how do we bring down the cost of our own steak?
Yeah. Actually, it was kind of the cows was started as some food storage on foot, or just kind of being prepared, just as a self-reliant sort of move. And it wasn't intended on being anything as big as it ended up being.
Okay.
Hank had access to some reasonably priced rented land, and so we bought a couple cows to put it on the rented land, and it was just going to be just kind of this small thing. But we didn't necessarily need the money off of that venture, so we just kept dumping the profits back into either keeping cows or buying more along the way, rather than taking profits home off of it, which is a good place to be in. The drain cleaning business, it was just kind of we started during some of the economic downturn. There were drains always get clogged. It was just kind of a business to start. We had somebody that kind of not talked us into opening it, but there was a guy that was gonna retire, and he said, you guys should buy this and just put it as a side business. And so we did. The water trucks, I don't know that there was any grand expansion. It's just it's a very seasonal project, but at one point we had 3 or 4 of them rather than just one. And in the summer times there's construction work and there's fires, so it was a good seasonal one.
Yeah. Okay, so what is your philosophy about losing money in a business?
Don't.
To not to?
Yeah. Try not to, but I mean, it's I know my dad has a couple saying they're slipping away from me, but he's got a couple sayings about losing money on businesses. And I mean, it's the goal is to not, obviously, but right. One of the things that that has stuck with me and that I heard my dad and my grandfather say a lot of times was, if you want a full meal, I'm going to botch this, but if you want a full meal but can't afford one right now, a sandwich will do, sort of philosophy. Like, yes, you want to have this great expansive empire of businesses or, insurance, like my insurance office. Yeah, I want a whole bunch, a bigger book or a multiple locations or whatever. But in the meantime, take what you can and work with it. And I think that that's on the side hustle sort of thing. Is it's important to keep doing what you're doing, what anybody is doing, while you're getting your side hustle going, until your side hustle can take over. And I think that's you've got a sandwich here that's going to feed you and your family for right now. Keep working on the side hustle while as a side hustle until it's big enough to become the full meal. Yeah. And because I had, and the backstory on it, I think, was people who had come to apply for jobs to work for my dad, and they would scoff at either the wage or the particular job. Like, they were above doing a particular job, or me and my brother thinking we were above doing a particular job. So you take what you can get and try and make ends meet, and always be looking for something else to be that full meal, that you might want. But
yeah, that's great, man. Go ahead.
Losing money on businesses sucks, though.
So you've done it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Tell me about the most painful one.
I really miss the farm and the cows. That's probably the most painful one. We didn't necessarily lose our butts on them necessarily, but the heartstrings attached to it is probably the bigger loss, because I really enjoyed being out in the farm field or working with the cows, that sort of thing. One of our long haul trucking ventures that we had, we lost money on because we were chasing repair problems with a machine. Mm-hmm. Like the truck had issues. We bought a Peterbilt truck, and we were doing hauling from Prineville to Portland, Prineville to Seattle, and it kept breaking, or it kept having issues, and we just kept it was a side hustle, so it wasn't our revenue to feed our families. So we're like, oh, the truck needs new tires, put new tires on it. Maybe that'll fix it. Oh, it wasn't tires. Maybe it's the rear ends that are giving it this problem. Throw a new rear end on it.
Oh man.
Now you're like $6,000 for tires. Now you're a couple $1,000 to do the rear ends, which fortunately we had the shop to be able to do a lot of the modifications.
Right. Yeah.
Then it was like, oh, now maybe it's the transmission.
Oh no.
And so it just, throwing good money after bad is always a painful event. But
there are lessons there. I mean, you undoubtedly learned really important lessons,
through
that process, which help you in the end.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to learn the hard way when to cut bait, like there's no way that this project is going to recoup the money, stop throwing money at it and just change gears. And we've had to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a pretty common theme as I talk to entrepreneurs and kind of, perpetual business guys is this, I put a lot of effort into this and it's time to either shut it down or just pivot its focus and do something a little bit different that makes more sense. And the willingness to do that and understanding the timing of when to do that can be a little tricky.
It can be. And I think it can be hard having an ego tied into it where like my name is on the line here or whatever, like we've put all of this blood, sweat, and tears into a project. I can't let it fail at this point. And sometimes it's beyond your control. Sometimes it's, timing. Sometimes it's, sometimes it just is what it is. And you've got to redirect not only your capital, but your time to go find something that will pay off. And sometimes it's okay, I'll come back to that project another time.
Okay, Sam. So most important question of the interview is, what is your philosophy about socks? I'm a huge sock guy. I love a good pair of socks. For your interview, you can't see them, but I wore these. These are like my industrial wool heavy. I don't know. I just imagine like working in the Workman and Sons shop, building truck beds with my steel-toed boots. These are the socks that I would wear. These are like my warm, cold weather industrial socks. What socks are you wearing? And tell me your sock story here.
It may disappoint. So
you're too busy starting businesses. You have time to think about socks.
No. I think about socks and shoes fairly regularly. But I'm an office guy now. I'm a casual office guy. I'm a hoodie and t-shirt at the office guy. But my typical everyday socks are just Costco, like the low profile, but they kind of keep the tension on them. But shoes are a bigger deal for me because of my
your injury.
Yeah, because I got smashed pretty bad. I go through shoes fairly regularly. Yeah. So comfortable, soft sock. I mean, as soon as the socks start losing their softness, I guess, or the padding in them, they're dead to me. And shoes the same way. Like, I go through shoes. I wear the same pairs day in and day out, but it's like I get new shoes probably more regularly than a lot of women do that are big shoes. But but I wear them out and then they're done. But I'll get a pair of shoes and I'll stick with them. Like I'll just go buy the same, like, okay, those fit, those were real comfortable.
Yep.
And I'll wear them until they either, keep buying the new set until they stop making them or they change the design.
Yep.
I have an Allstate friend that I travel with quite a bit, that he and I were in Seattle for a regional board that we were on, and we had some spare time, and there's a Danner factory outlet. We were right by the Boeing factory up there in Seattle.
Yeah.
And we were just we went and had dinner, and there was a Danner store, and I walked in, and I've got odd shaped feet because I crushed the one, and I started trying on shoes, and I was like, ooh, I like that pair. And I bought, and I haggled with the guy because I said, can I get these online? I'm from Oregon. I don't want to pay your sales tax up here.
Right.
And he's like, he didn't void out the sales tax, but he gave me the Boeing union discount, which offset the sales tax or whatever. And my friend, he like looked at me like, really, you're just going to come to Seattle and buy new shoes? I'm like, shoes are my thing. It's got to be comfortable. And so not a sock story, but
okay. I'll give you a little bit of a pass on the socks, especially with your foot injury. All right.
But but on dress socks, I do the crazy socks. I've got Australian flag socks and
nice.
socks with dogs and all that sort of stuff on them. But with the pandemic, there's not much of a reason to wear them.
No.
So.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I've always said that if I were a really rich guy, I would only wear brand new socks because it doesn't even matter what kind they are. They could be the Costco pack, whatever, but there is something magical for me about pulling on a new pair of socks.
Absolutely. And even when the laundry is done and they're not brand new, like here's this big basket of socks, I'll sort through and find the ones that are obviously newer than the other ones.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
My daughter and I, she's 15, she'll turn 16 in January. We are putting together blessing bags for homeless people. There's a lot of homeless people in the Portland metro area. You always see them on the freeway on ramps or just corners or whatever. And I always try to give them a couple of bucks, and just, it is what it is. You don't know what their issue is. I don't care what their backstory is or what they're going to use it for. To me, it's doing something, that I can. But last year, my daughter started putting together these little blessing bags so that the kids in the car, my kids in the car could kind of hang it out the window and give them something. And this, just last night, we put together about 35 of them or whatever. And she and I went to Costco and bought 36 new pairs of tall. They weren't, she was looking at the big winter socks at Costco. And I'm like, if we're going to do 30 of these, we're going to have to go with,
we're going to have to scale it down a little bit.
Yeah. And again, it's back to a sandwich is better than, if all you've got is a sandwich, take it. I told her, look, if we're giving socks to these people that are homeless and very needy, they're going to be really glad that they get the tall tube socks that they feel, they're going to be clean, they're going to be warm, they're going to be better than what they've got on. And anyways, so we were building blessing bags last night, and the socks are a good timing. So
that's a great idea. I mean, you talk about a demographic that almost never gets to put on a nice, new, clean pair of socks. I'm sure they are just super appreciative. What an awesome thing for you to do. What a great thing for your kids to see, in this time of, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of uncertainty, and, it's a great thing you're doing there.
And I don't say it to puff our chest up or anything, but socks are good. Everybody loves a good pair of socks, and clean socks are awesome.
Absolutely. So. That's awesome. Very cool. Sam, I really appreciate you coming and joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
It's been fun walking down memory lane. Well, this wraps up this episode of the Socks and Soul podcast with my friend Sam Workman. Great lessons to learn from him and his family, and the way that, the way that you're teaching your kids and the legacy that you're leaving behind and moving forward. So thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time. The Socks and Soul podcast is a production of Ditto Film Media. If you enjoy this content, be sure to give it a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Join the conversation on Facebook at Socks and Soul Podcast.